This episode is sponsored by Cyberlytica, combating fraud, account takeover, and information warfare. Get a free dark web password scan now from Cyberlytica. Use promo code HACKEDAGAIN. W. Curtis Preston, aka Mr. Backup, has specialized in designing data protection systems since 1993 and has designed such systems for some of the largest organizations in the world. His lively pro and wry, real-world approach has made him a popular author and speaker. He has written 4 O'Reilly books, the latest of which is Modern Data Protection, published in 2021. He's also the host of BackupCentral.com and its Restore It All podcast. He's now the Chief Technical Evangelist for Druva, the only at-scale SaaS provider of data protection. Hey, welcome to the show, Curtis. So I want to ask you, what keeps you up at night?
You know, I have been in the backup space, as you mentioned, for a long time. And I do have very much a heart for people losing data. And when I think about, for a long time, data centers is the way the world looked when I joined the industry, right? Every company of any size had a data center. The data center now is no longer the center of data, and it's been moved. A lot of it has been moved into the cloud, either in something like AWS or in a service like Microsoft 365 or G Suite or Salesforce. There are hundreds of SaaS services like that. The biggest concern that I have is, as companies and people have migrated their compute and storage to the cloud, is that the old school concept of backup and recovery and disaster recovery got sort of left by the wayside. And so I worry a lot about the average company. Like, if you look at Microsoft 365, the vast majority of them do not deploy a backup solution to back up that really important data. Same thing with Salesforce, G Suite, right? Many companies do, but most companies do not. And I do worry about, and then there's, again, services like AWS, where it's a little less common to have people not back up their data, but it is still common to have them not, or they back up their data in a way that is easily hackable. And basically, the thing that keeps me awake at night is a company or someone that I know losing their data, because having spent my entire career doing this, that's really all that I care about. And I do think that we've already had some major incidents where companies and even massive companies, like I think about, there was a cloud vendor in France, OVH. It was this cloud vendor, and they had a fire, a massive fire that took out 2 data centers, and many of their customers lost basically everything in that fire because they didn't deploy the backups the way I see them. Right? There's this concept called the 3-2-1 rule that we can talk about, that basically ensures that not only that your data is backed up, but it's stored in a way that can survive both some sort of cyber attack or something physical, like that giant fire that happened to OVH. Wow. So yeah, that's it. Is that there are way too many companies that have really important data that they may think is backed up, and it's not.
It's interesting, but before the interview, I was just doing a little bit of reading on backups, just educating myself. And one stat I came across that kind of stood out to me, it said that approximately 60% of data backups are incomplete, and about 50% of the restores are unsuccessful. And that kind of resonated me with the points that you just talked about there. And I guess if companies don't have a plan to really just implement it on a regular basis to back up their data, and they figure, oh, it's up in the cloud, I'm safe, and they're not thinking about the inevitable potential for a fire or natural disaster or something like that, it can be scary. I mean, within our company, literally this week, one of the employees came upstairs and said, Scott, my computer won't start. And I was like, what? And we've got a lot of information, a lot of proprietary information on it. Now,
Right.
fortunately, it was a power supply that went out. We replaced the power supply. He was okay. But we have a plan where we implement once a month a regular backup. What we do is we do it on a really large stick, and take that and we keep it offsite in a safe storage. And it takes time. It takes discipline. It takes some management. A little bit of cost there, not too bad, but it works when everybody's not connected necessarily into a giant network, and you have to worry about losing things. And again, we're a small business. We're an engineering firm under 30 employees. Does that formula, from your opinion, is that effective for small business owners to try to implement a backup plan, something like that, to protect their crown jewels?
So I'll make a couple of statements,
Yeah,
and some, not knowing anything about my career, some may think, well, he works for Druva, which is a backup as a service company, and so of course he's going to recommend backup as a service. So I'm going to say that I've been in the industry for almost 30 years, and I've always recommended backup as a service. I've only been at Druva for about 4 years or so.
Okay.
Here's the concern. There's nothing necessarily wrong with the process that you mentioned. It does conform to the 3-2-1 rule, which is 3 copies of your data on 2 different media, one of which is stored somewhere else. So if you're storing it off-site, you're at least solving that problem. And if it's offline, that's very helpful against something like a cyber attack. Yes. The concern that I have about any process that involves physically doing anything is, the first thing you mentioned is you do this once a month, and my little heart goes pitter patter. I'm like, well, that means you could lose a month's worth of data, right?
True. That's true.
Depending on when, and then you've got this whole backup on essentially one device. That if something were to go wrong with that one device, well, now you're SOL, right? I am not generally, like, for example, I'm talking to you on a MacBook. I like Time Machine. Time Machine's a very nice tool, but I don't use it as a backup tool, right? Obviously I work for Druva. Druva has our system running on here, and they're backing it up with that. We're not the only company like this, right? There are many companies that have services where you can basically put an agent on your laptop, and they do what's called source side deduplication. It's this concept of eliminating duplicate data in the backup stream at the beginning of the process. And so what it does is it drops by 1 or 2 orders of magnitude the amount of data the amount of bandwidth that you need to back up a laptop, right? So nice. What I would think would be much better from I like the idea of a backup that just happens, that no one has to think about it. Sure. It happens all the time. In fact, my laptop is actually backed up multiple times throughout the day, which is massive overkill because I don't create a lot of data. In fact, most of the data that I create is in the cloud, right? We use Google Apps, right? So, but that's as you start to get to be a bigger company, right? When you start getting into the many hundreds of employees or perhaps thousands of employees, that's when at what we call an on-premises backup system, you start thinking about that concept. And the concern that I have about that now, and again, I spent most of my career helping customers deploy on-premises backup system. The thing that's happened in the last, say, 4 or 5 years has been, and really in the last 1 to 2 years, has been that the ransomware attacks that are not just attacking your laptop, but they're specifically going after your on-premises backup system.
Yeah.
And so most of these disk-based on-premises backup systems. There are, literally hundreds of those, and there's a handful of, main vendors in that space that most everybody would know. Most of them are based on running on Windows, maybe Linux, depending on the product, and they store data on disk. Well, all of that is just another target for the backup, for the ransomware attackers to go after. And so my long-term sort of love, that's how I ended up working at Druva, was that I think that for many people, if not most companies, the idea of an offsite backup service, right, means that you don't have that cyber attack risk. You don't have to worry about the disaster recovery risk because your data is automatically offsite. And if done properly, it can be less expensive than the alternatives. Now, nothing's going to be less expensive than the system that you talked about, right? You're just using a handful of small drives. Nothing's going to be cheaper than that. Yeah. But that would not be discipline that I would design.
Yeah, I was going to say it requires discipline too. I think that's an important factor. I like the point you make about having, if it's a third party, it's going to be done, and you can count on that. If you leave it up to your own, you got to make sure that you keep implementing it and stay on top of it. So it does require some work. Hey, I'm glad you also brought up the point about ransomware, because I think that's it's almost synonymous now when we think about backups. A lot of people always say to me, which is kind of an incorrect statement, I believe, that, what's something you can do to prevent ransomware? And they say, back your data up. And I'm saying, well, not really. That allows you to respond if you're a victim of ransomware. Mm-hmm. But oftentimes I'll share with people and talk to them and use the term having an immutable backup. Mm-hmm. Can you maybe share from your insight as Mr. Backup, why is that so important for people to kind of get the sense it should be immutable?
Well, again, because ransomware products are directly targeting their backups, right? So if, the immutable is just a word that means it can't be changed. Mm-hmm. And so, and changed also means deleted. Okay. So if it's truly immutable, not only is it, because immutable, we think about the concept of immutability in a couple different ways. We think about it won't change over time, like it won't become accidentally corrupted. That's one sort of concept of immutability. And then the other is that it's like physically hard to get rid of it, right? And so like the Conti ransomware group, CONTI, their MO is that once they infect an environment, the first thing they do is they go after the backup server. There's a specific product, I won't name it because it's a competitor, but there's a specific product that they go after. And if they find that product, they know where the backups are. They go in and they exfiltrate the backups. And then once they've exfiltrated the backups, then they just delete them, right? Because they're not immutable, right? That particular product happens to have some options to create an immutable backup. The concern that I have for their customers is that the vast majority of their customers have not enacted those options. They cost money. You need another server. You might need another service, right? And so again with the disclaimer that yes, I understand I work for Druva and it's literally my job to evangelize Druva. Having said that, the idea of having your backup stored in a completely separate environment, right? If you're a Druva customer, your backups are not stored in your cloud account. Your backups are stored in we actually run in AWS. Our technology runs in AWS. So your data is stored behind our account, not in your account. So even if the worst happened in your environment and you're completely infected with ransomware, there's no path for the ransomware to take to get to your backups, right? So it's immutable in that way. We also use object storage. I don't know if any of your customers or your listeners are aware of the concept of object versus file, but object has built into it the concept of immutability because each object has a unique identifier, and that unique identifier changes if any of the content of the object changes. So immutability is basically built into the concept of object storage, and all of our customers' data are stored in object storage. It's also automatically replicated to like 3 different locations.
Hmm.
And we separate the data from the metadata to protect. Again, it's all about protecting our customers. And again, looking at other ways to do it. Our competitors have ways to add features like this on top of it, but their customers have to do all that extra work, buy extra servers, and then just as importantly, secure those extra servers, right? They've got to harden them from a cybersecurity attack, and then they've got to do penetration testing against them. Our customers don't have to do any of that. They just literally have to sign a PO and authenticate us in the right place, and then magic happens.
That's great stuff. Hey, some of our viewers and listeners may want to learn a little bit more, Curtis, about what you guys are doing there at Druva. Could you share what's the best way to maybe reach out and contact you or your company and find out a little bit more about backups?
Yeah, so 2 things. One, you mentioned earlier my book. Mm-hmm. So it's an O'Reilly book, and I did publish it last year. Druva actually decided to sponsor the book. So if you want a copy of my book, you can go to druva.com/podcast, and you can download a free ebook copy of my book. And I am sure that once you do that, you will be contacted by someone because that's how these things work.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Excellent.
And there's also, obviously,
website, Curtis.
Yeah, at druva.com, druva.com. Obviously, and if you're interested in my other podcast, just search for Restore It All, at your favorite podcatcher, and we do a weekly podcast. If you can imagine this, we talk about backups and related topics for about 45 minutes every week.
Wow!
for the last 3 years, it's it's a lot of work, but it's the labor of love, so it's all good.
And it is an important topic, though. I actually listened into the podcast. I do recommend it because it's not just a technical discussion. It's actually a lively conversation that you have, which I think is the part that's enjoyable about it. So, again, we'll put in the show notes there and on your screen there some of those links so you can check out his podcast, check out his books, and I'm assuming you can also go to Amazon, Curtis, to find your books.
Yeah, obviously, if you search on modern data protection, if you want a printed copy. Or you don't want to get put into the Druva sales pipeline, then you can buy either a physical or an ebook copy from there.
Excellent, great. Well, again, thank you so much for taking a little bit of time sharing your insight there, Mr. Backup. Really appreciate it, and thanks for the time. We really learned a lot of things, and it's going to hopefully put us all in the mindset of looking at our own personal circumstances within our organization. Are we properly backing up our data? And if we have any questions or we're not, Curtis, you're the man. We're going to be reaching out to you. Thanks again.
Back it up or give it up. That's what I like to say. Thanks for having me on.